I walked up the sidewalk, finished my cigarette and stubbed it out, went in the door, ordered a beer, took my seat. This, spiritual. Now growing up in Oklahoma, I was raised in the church every Sunday, and I use that word every kind of loosely. We would leave the house and walk to the big monstrous building just outside the backyard. Behind those doors, we drank coffee, shook hands, said our how do you do's, and then we'd drift off into an hour-long sleep of sermon. Now, sermon was an hour, or 30 minutes if the game was on, where everyone in the congregation sat and sat and sat and sat, half paying attention to the lesson at hand, but more so worrying about the week to come, recounting the week that had passed, balancing our checkbooks, whispering across pews, silently yelling at our children for being too loud, quietly and sternly judging the pregnant teenager on one side of the room and shunning the bastard on the other, debating whether our tithe was too little or too much, condemning, condoning, and communing, all while feigning the least bit of spiritual enlightenment. Hallelujah. And on an early Sunday morning, the question was inescapable: have you found God? Now, finding God, that's a lot harder than it sounds. I mean, that guy's supposed to be like everywhere, right? But my search for God proved to be one of the most wicked games of hide and seek ever. Started out, I looked for him in the most obvious places, the places where everyone else seemed to find him. The search started inside those towering walls behind stained glass. All I found were people doing the same thing as me, but I didn't know if they knew it, and they were unhappy. Next place I looked was in this really thick book. I can't remember the name of it, but maybe you've heard of it. It was passed down by word of mouth from illiterates, then written down by people many hundreds of years ago, then translated again, then retranslated a few dozen more times, like the longest game of telephone ever. I didn't find him there either, but I found a lot of questionable claims, and then later on some stuff about love. I think that last part usually gets overlooked. It's like they say the Bible is kind of like a software agreement. You don't really read that shit word for word because it's so fucking long. You just scroll to the bottom and click, I agree.
Yes.
Name the place, been there, looked there, came back with about as much of a clue as before, but with some commentary along the way. But it's when you're not looking for God I figured out that you might find him. See, I sat down one day and I figured out that I found God. I found him on the corner with a cigarette and bummed him a light. I found him in the parking lot of your workplace. I listened to him whenever he talked. Found him in dimly lit living rooms behind beer bottles, blunts, bongs, bums. Found him in a room full of people. He was sitting behind a laptop in a pile of yellow scraps of paper, scratching down mediocre lines. He looked me back in my reflection and said, "You're getting warmer. Keep up the work."